Hey guys, Rika here, and today I'm going to be showing you the shield variant of the Virtuoso in the Shadows of the Obscure beta. So going into the beta with the Mesmer, you do start off with the Marauder stats, which is all of your gear and all of your weapons. They do give you gear boxes that you can use to basically make your own set, which is why I decided to play with a whole bunch of different combinations, but for power I'm just going to stick with Marauder. So because this is a beta, I'm doing what I always do with a beta in any game, just trying everything out. There are going to be weapon sets and gear sets that are better for power or Condi builds, and of course you have the support build, which I'm not even going to cover in my videos here. But I'm going to just try everything out, knowing full well that certain things like the Great Sword shouldn't be used on a Condi spec. For those of you who haven't been playing Guild Wars 2 for very long, you probably haven't figured out the perfect combination for your gear and weapons and all of the stats, along with specializations, which is why I'm using the opportunity of basically free stat selectable gear to showcase what kind of options you have and giving a contrast basically between all of the different combinations. The other reason that I do this with betas, especially when they just hand me free gear, is that I like to go back after the expansion comes out and make comparisons between what's available in the expansion and what was there during the beta. You can see in patch notes what they've changed, but sometimes I think that just kind of playing through the changes is more interesting. I have to say kudos to ArenaNet for not just giving us stat selectable gear in the betas, but also providing us with multiple sets so that we can play around like this. It is absolutely ingenious. So as you can see here, I'm starting off with the Axe Shield combination. Of course, for those who don't know, Axe has historically only been available to the Mirage specialization for the Mesmer. So based on my gameplay here, I would say that the Axe Shield combination is probably better for a Condi spec, but it is actually pretty great for mobility if you prefer melee. Next up, I'm going to try out the Sword and Shield combination. For those who aren't aware, the sword is one of those weapons that has been available for every Mesmer spec historically. So what I want to determine here is whether or not Blurred Frenzy is more effective at stocking blades for the Virtuoso versus other weapons, just because you're going to be hitting the enemy so many times. For those who are unfamiliar with the Virtuoso, you want to be able to stock as many blades as quickly as possible as you can for your blade songs. Given that the shield skill number 5, Tides of Time, does damage to enemies, I would hope that it would be helping with the stocking of blades for my blade songs. Even considering the possibility of Tides of Time helping to stock blades for you, the melee weapon is still going to be your main source. As I'm sure you've noticed, I have not tweaked the default spec that I was given when I went into the beta, and I'm thinking that the best tweak you could probably do, at least for the sword shield combo, would be giving yourself some more alacrity. One thing that I've noticed with the Virtuoso specialization is that blade songs can be an issue. Not just the blade songs, but I'm going to specifically address those because of what I'm noticing with the sword and shield combination that I think is going to help with this. So when you use the sword skill number 3, the leap, it sends an illusion at the target which cripples them, and then when you channel the shield skill number 4 at the end of the channel, or when you've blocked an attack, you summon a phantasm that slows the enemy. I think this is really important with blade songs because enemies that move around like crazy end up becoming a line of sight issue, and your blade songs end up on cooldown, or with a short global cooldown basically, because the enemy wasn't in your line of sight. Next up, I'm doing the Scepter and Shield. The Scepter is one of those weapons that I have kind of a mixed relationship with. I don't really like channeled abilities. They can be really powerful, and with the Scepter, that's definitely the case. I just have kind of a preference against channeling. Of course, you're gonna see a lot more of the Scepter's power probably when I switch over to a condition spec, because as of right now, it is more of a condition weapon. It does look like the Scepter abilities on the Virtuoso are the same as the core Mesmer skills, which makes it pretty easy to try out, although I do actually prefer the number 1 skill on the Mirage spec, the Ether Barrage. This combination seems to be pretty good for both defense and offense, just because you have so much ability to block, but you're also doing a fair bit of damage. Of course, this is on Marauder spec, so it's going to be a lot better when I go to Vipers. Coming up next is the Dagger and Shield combo. For those who don't know, the Dagger was introduced to the Mesmer with the Virtuoso specialization in End of Dragons. So one of the recent changes to the Dagger is actually really interesting, and I didn't like it at first, but now I do. It's the skill number 3. You used to just kind of wildly send it off in a random direction wherever your character was facing, but now you actually have to place where you want it to go. When I first tried playing the Virtuoso and I sent the Unstable Blade Storm off into the Nether, I kept aggroing all sorts of stuff that I wasn't trying to target, which could be kind of annoying. Sometimes it was useful, you know, if I was trying to, say, farm some karma in Siren's Landing, but usually it was really annoying. Now the Unstable Bladestorm is a ground-targeted skill. I do think that you have a lot more control over which enemies those blades are piercing when they fly all over the place. Since the Dagger skill number 3 is now a ground-targeted ability, I would suggest turning off the Snap to Ground Target option in your options menu, just so that you can place it where you really want it. I did have an issue, as you probably just saw, with placing the Unstable Bladestorm on an enemy and having the enemy run out of range. A possible option for mitigating this issue would be to use the shield number 5, Tides of Time, to stop the enemy and then place the Unstable Bladestorm, or to place the Unstable Bladestorm and quickly use skill number 5. Now to test out the Virtuoso condition spec. I've mainly played the dual daggers as condition Virtuoso, so this should be interesting. As you can probably tell, this is not really an optimized build. I didn't put in any specialized runes or sigils in my gear, but if you do want to try a real spec with this, I would suggest going to Hardstuck, Snow Crows, or Meta Battle to play around with builds there. For my gear and weapons, I opted for Viper's stats, and for the shield and my accessories, I went with Trailblazers. There are, of course, multiple stat combinations that you can use for a condition build, and who knows what's going to be optimal in the expansion, but for now I'm just going to stick with what I'm familiar with. The skin I chose this time is the Snowdrift Shield, which is a skin that I got a long time ago, and I haven't bothered to use at all. So perfect opportunity. If I had more than one day to play this beta, because, you know, full-time job, I would have definitely done a Fashion Wars just to get rid of some of my transmutation charges. To start off the Condi round, I'm going Axe and Shield. Of course, as I stated earlier in this video, I am just playing around with different combinations for comparison and for fun because free gear, so why not? But I do have some concerns about using the shield in a condition spec. Don't get me wrong, blocking attacks and stopping enemies in their tracks are very valuable in any mode of gameplay, but I do think that the cooldowns can be a bit limiting. For that reason, I think a possible way to mitigate the issue would be to make a perma-alacrity build, if that's even possible when the expansion comes out. Maxing out your alacrity, of course, is always ideal, but barring a perma-alacrity spec, I think that your best bet is probably just to have a good weapon swap. You can spec into Chaotic Interruption in the Chaos skill tree, which will randomly recharge one of your weapon skills, but there are no shield-specific recharges available in the Mesmer traits. Mind you, I'm not weapon swapping purposely because I'm showcasing the shield here, not the main hand weapon, and if I were to weapon swap, the shield would still have the same cooldown. And now it's time to switch over to the sword. The sword is a lot of fun to play just because of Blurred Frenzy and Illusionary Leap, unless of course you really hate melee range combat. A majority of my sword experience was actually playing the Mirage specialization, but I think that the sword is probably viable in all of them. The advantage that the sword would give with the shield, of course, would be with being able to stop the enemies, because when you use the Blurred Frenzy, if the enemy is moving around, you may not end up hitting them at all. That is a problem, however, that I've mainly had in World vs. World and PvP. You may have noticed that my blade stocking is definitely slower since I switched over to a condition spec, but part of that has to do with the fact that I'm not weapon swapping. And of course you have the factors of not tweaking my spec every time I'm changing a weapon, and the fact that I haven't optimized my runes and sigils. After the expansion comes out on August 22nd, I'd give it probably maybe 2 to 4 weeks, and I guarantee you Lord Hyzen is going to have an optimized Mesmer build, so keep an eye out for that. He does seem to prefer the Mirage specialization, so there's no guarantee that he would do a Virtuoso build, but I'm sure he could be convinced. And now to swap over to try the Dagger with the Shield in the Condi spec. I unfortunately didn't have enough time to go through every weapon combination with the shield on the condition side of the video, but if the expansion follows historical patterns, you can rest assured that the Scepter will be a decent Condi weapon as well. So far with the shield on the Virtuoso, I am partial to the axe and the dagger combos. What do you guys think? Would you use the shield in the expansion on the Virtuoso? And if so, which weapon would you pair it with? As always, I would say that whether or not you should use a shield on a Virtuoso when the expansion comes in August is going to depend on the game mode, what it is that you're trying to do, and your playstyle. Whenever I've played RPGs and Morpegs, or MMORPGs, I like to say Morpegs, I've always started out with ranged characters. I always kind of preferred that to get a feel for the game at a distance, and later on I would start getting into a melee class. If you are a player who prefers long range, you're going to be better off with the Greatsword. That has a range of 1200, so it's going to give you a lot of leeway. Alternatively, you could always go with the Staff. It is a little bit closer range in general, but it is still not really a melee weapon. If you prefer a mix of ranged and melee, I would say the Dagger Shield combo is great. You can use the shield from a distance, and you can use it up close, and same thing with the dagger. And if you prefer melee range, you have two really viable options with the axe and the sword. I am partial to the axe just because I like the abilities, but both of them are viable, and the sword's skill number 2 is just ridiculous. Now, as you can see, I'm using the Scepter with the shield, and again, I'm kind of torn with the Scepter because it has great abilities, but I don't like channeled abilities all that much. My biases aside though, the Scepter is great at inflicting conditions on your foes, and conditions are definitely useful. So if I choose to use a shield on my Virtuoso in the expansion, I'm probably going to go with the Scepter shield on one weapon skill bar, and on the other one I would have the Axe Torch. That would be with optimized condition gear, definitely, assuming of course that those remain very good condition weapons. For sigils, well, I guess we'll see what they're going to do in the expansion. I know they're supposed to be overhauling the runes, but I don't recall if they said anything about the sigils. So if I was going to actually gear up right now for the Virtuoso shield and Axe Torch combo, I would go with the sigils of Torment and Energy, most likely, but in the expansion those may not even be viable anymore. That's all I've got for this one, guys. So thanks for watching as always, and if you haven't already, please like and subscribe.